Hi, boys and girls. It's time for another story. This is Grandma Sheila, and our story today is called Saved by a Prayer and a Song. This story happened in 1889 in Pennsylvania, way up in the hills. There was a little village. It had 2 log houses, 2 little bitty shanties, one dilapidated old falling apart barn, and a little shed, and a little bit of cleared land around it. And then it went out into the woods. Well, there, in one of those log houses, there lived a family. There was 7 of them. There was Mummy and Daddy, 3 little boys, and 2 little girls, Nina and Dot. Well, the family had moved to Pennsylvania because this was where their mommy had lived years ago when she was a little girl, and she loved the mountains of Pennsylvania. She wasn't very well, and so they thought that bringing her to those mountains in Pennsylvania would make her feel better. All their possessions had been packed up and were brought from Michigan to Pennsylvania in a big horse-drawn wagon. When the wagon had gotten to Pennsylvania, there had been a terrible storm, and a flood had come up, and it had washed away that wagon and everything that family of 7 owned. Well, that wasn't a good thing, but none of them had been hurt. So they were just glad to be alive. And they had gotten one of those houses in that little village, one of the 2 log cabins. It wasn't too long after moving there that Mother, she had an older daughter who lived about 3.5 miles over the hill through the woods and down in a little valley. She lived with her husband and her baby. And Mother had promised Dot and Nina that they could go visit her in the daytime, going down that road that went through the woods. It was fun. They liked to play hide and seek in that woods. Well, Mother said they could go, but she cautioned them. Now make sure and leave before it gets dark. I don't want anything to happen to my little girls. You know there's wild animals in these woods. And in those days there was. I have driven through those hills and what they call mountains in Pennsylvania, and they're very solid with trees. So I can imagine there's still some animals that live in them now. Well, the little girls were anxious to get going, and they skipped down the road until they came to that big, thick woods. Well, when they were partway there, they started playing hide and go seek and doing fun things in that woods. But then they remembered they wanted to go see the baby, and so they hurried along the road. And it wasn't long till they got over those hills and down into that valley and got to the house. Well, by this time, it was lunchtime. So they had lunch together. Then they played with the baby, and they just kept playing. Their older sister was very, very, very busy taking care of that baby and getting the house cleaned and getting dinner made for that night, that she didn't look out the window to see that it was becoming late afternoon, and the 2 little girls were so busy playing that they didn't notice either. Well, finally, the clock in the corner went dong, 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 dong 4 times. Now, It was almost winter, and the sun was going down earlier. 4 o'clock. Oh my! They knew they needed to hurry. They got on their coats and they started down through that valley and then up the side of the next hill until they were to that woods. Well, about 2 miles of what they had to walk was woods. Well, they set off, and it was so pretty. It was nice and cool. The breeze was blowing through the tops of those trees. And then Nina, she got a good idea. She said, I know where there's a patch of wintergreen berries. Let's go pick some and bring them back to Mama as a surprise. So that's what they did. They climbed over some rocks and they climbed over a log. And sure enough, here was a whole patch of bushes covered with wintergreen berry. They picked quite a few of those. And they played some more hide and seek. And now, when they looked up, the sun was starting to go behind the trees. Oh no, it was getting dark. So they started running at first. But then the littler sister, she got tired and she was looking at those trees and there was dark shadows and she was afraid. So Nina said, I know what, let's play a game as we go. Well, sometimes when the little girls played out in the woods, they did play a game. They played a game that they would see something, like a bear or something, and they tried to scare each other. I don't think that was a very nice thing to do, especially since these little girls were Christian girls. They and their mommy believed in Jesus and they loved him. Then I had said, let's just play that. Dot, she started to point down the road and she said, look by that big black stump. There's a... And then her whole face looked on in shock because from back behind those bushes and that stump came a big black panther. Now, panthers, they're like huge cats, and they're very dangerous. Well, it appeared that almost at the same time that the little girls saw that panther, the panther saw them, and he crouched down, and he started crawling, oh, so slowly toward them. The little girls were afraid. What were they going to do? Dot, she said, let's run away. Let's run away, Nina. And her older sister said, no, remember, Father told us, you don't run away. You don't show an animal that you're afraid. What could we do? They stood there trying to think. And then they remembered that someone had told them, if you sang loudly, an animal would be afraid because they wouldn't know what you were doing. So Nina, she stood there and she tried to think of a song. Oh, she couldn't think of a song. Could you think of a song that might be helpful? Well, the two little girls stood there and Nina, she looked up to the sky. She knew Jesus lived up there. She thought of a song. It was an old hymn, and it went something like this. There is sunlight on the hilltops. There is sunlight on the sea. Oh, the sunlight, beautiful sunlight. Oh, the sunlight in the heart. Jesus' smile can banish sadness. It's the sunshine in the heart. Well, those two little girls started singing about the sunlight. There was sunlight on the hilltops. There was sunlight on the sea. And the sunlight, they sang about the smile of Jesus. And at first, their voices were real soft, and they almost trembled in fright. But as they kept singing, they kept walking toward that panther. Now, that panther couldn't quite figure them out. He started crawling toward them. He looked this way and he looked that way, and his tail was going swish, 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 swish. And he was crouched like he was going to jump at them. But the little girls kept singing. And the more they sang, the more they thought about what they knew about Jesus, how Jesus could protect them. And Jesus was like the sunlight in their hearts. And they sang louder and clearer and sweeter. And they kept walking. They kept walking till they got right across from that panther. They took a big deep breath and they started singing loudly again. There's sunlight in the hilltops. And they didn't turn around and look at that panther. They just kept looking straight ahead and singing at the top of their little lungs. By now, the only sunlight that there was left was the very tops of the trees. There was a little bit of light. While Mama at home, she kept looking out her kitchen window. Where were her little girls? They didn't seem to be coming. She kept looking, and the time, she kept looking at the clock. It was getting later and later. Finally, Mama felt she couldn't wait any longer, and she went out to that dilapidated old barn, and she got out their wagon. She hitched it up to the horses, and she started down the road. Oh, where were her little girls? She kept looking and looking. She couldn't hear anything. Finally, she went, "What's that?" And she heard voices. It sounded like the voices of a small angel choir. They were so sweet. And there was that hymn that she knew. There was sunlight in the hilltops. And Mother started to smile. It had to be her little girls, maybe joined by angels singing. But she hurried up those horses, and she went up over the hills and down. And pretty soon she came over the top of a hill, and she could still hear their voices, and she saw her two little girls. When they saw their mama, they knew help had come, and they started to rush toward her. But when they got close enough, Mama saw that their faces were white from being so scared, and they were so frightened by their experience that they couldn't even tell Mama what had happened yet. But after a while, they did tell Mama. They told him how Jesus had given him the idea to sing, and how they sang the song about Jesus in the sunlight in their hearts. And then they weren't afraid anymore. And when they had looked back down the road, after Mama had gotten there, that panther had disappeared into the bushes of the woods and was gone. You know, those two little girls never forgot that experience. And ever after that, they learned the hymns and the songs about Jesus, and they hid them in their heart for when they might need them someday. Do you know, boys and girls, all the songs you learn at church and at home during your family worships? Learn the words about Jesus helping you, because someday you might need those words in your travels. Thank you so much, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.